but we are in a separate building, separated from everyone else at the reunion weekend. I don't know if you caught on to that. So when they realized that the class of '69 was coming for a reunion, they thought, crap, what are we going to do with these guys? You know, the last time they were here, they caused a lot of trouble. So they decided to put us in this building with no one else, and what you don't know are their guards downstairs. And if we get too liquored up, they're not going to let us out to try to block off Linden Street again if we could. So on a serious note, I'd like to call to the podium here Frank McCartney to do a salute to veterans and to the military.
Thank you, David. First of all, I'd like to invite all the veterans to stand. If you're here, please. Folks, please. You know, as you enter the room this evening, you look over here to my left, you may have noticed a table that is not occupied. Table stands for a place of honor. In setting this table, we acknowledge those missing from our celebration today, and we remember them. Each part of this table carries a specific meaning. The table shows our everlasting concern for our missing men. The tablecloth is white to symbolize the purity of the members' intent to serve his or her country. Single red rose displayed in a vase reminds us of life, each missing and their loved ones and friends. The slice of lemon on the bread plate is to remind us of the bitter fate of those captured and missing in a foreign land. A pinch of salt symbolizes the tears endured by those missing and their families who seek answers. The Bible represents the strength gained through faith to sustain those lost from our country, founded as one nation under God. The glass is inverted, unlike ours, to symbolize their inability to share this evening's toast. The chair is empty. They are missing. Let us now raise our water glasses in a toast to honor America's POWs, MIAs, and departed classmates. Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Steve Bushness, are you here? Come on up. This will be brief, folks, but as a point of privilege, I'm going to ask Steve to read something for us. This represents where we are today. Do you need this? Okay, there you go. Just please return it. Sure. Thanks so much, folks.
This was something. I wrote in 2006. I had 2 sons in the military. I myself was in Vietnam. There's a difference between being ignored and being despised. At the time, they were talking about veterans as a potential source of terror for the country because they had been trained in military tactics and combat, that type of thing. And it really, really aggravated me. So I wrote this. I took the time to write it as a way of dealing with the feelings. It says, the true warrior is a man of utmost integrity. He's been called upon to impose his will and prevail against the enemy. He's been trained to impart to certain death while facing opponents who who have the same capability. He's not fearless, he is disciplined. He is disciplined in all things, both large and small. He has committed himself to discipline and accumulated multiple disciplines to support his strength of determination and action. He's a man of action. Fear will not deter his response. He is decisive. He does not hesitate. He will not lose the advantage that action gives him. He's a man of confidence. His confidence is tempered by vigilance and acceptance of uncertainty. He's a man of loyalty, to principles, to purpose, to comrades, and to the country he serves. He's a man of patience. His tasks and time for action are not of his choosing. He's a man practiced and prepared to do what has to be done. His purpose is a swift and effective outcome. He's a man of order. Chaos is the embodiment of war. He imposes order on himself and others as the way to victory. He's neither selfish nor foolish in nature. He feels the tensions of life and death that stretches up and down the lines of command. He's a man of faith. He believes in a purpose larger than himself and risks his life to achieve that purpose. He's a man of respect. He respects himself and others who shoulder the weight of their country. The true warrior is forgiving. Those trained to see the end of days see farther, see clearer than most. The true warrior is not a job description. He is a man of utmost integrity. Thank you.
Everyone take a deep breath. So we want to end the program with some reflections about what went on 50 years ago on campus. And the committee searched out far and wide to see if they could find 4 guys who still remembered what happened. I didn't qualify, but we do have 4 people who claim anyway that they remember clearly what was going on 50 years ago and have volunteered to come up and share some of those remembrances and reflections with all of us. So I want to begin with Bob Bednar.
Ice cream.
Dave, there's nothing written here. Okay. Hey, Steve, that was from the heart, and I just want you to know that for me, that was very powerful. And I'm sure it was very powerful for everybody else. Please give Steve Next, I'd like to ask you all to take a look at this medal that we just received. Stand up if you have one and give yourselves a hand, because it's 50 years worth of hard work, education, Jesuit experience that we've all received. So come on, give yourself a hand. I enjoyed meeting everybody the last few nights and seeing so many diverse careers that happen. I arrived here at the University of Scranton as an average young man out of high school, wanting to be able to be a well-rounded person, and that kind of happened. Those of you who don't know me, I've served a number of things here at the university, from alumni board member to alumni president to board of trustee member to then back to board member, and so on and so forth. And the things that I've learned out of all this is that I was so well prepared to be able to handle all of those. Not only that, but my career spanned a number of different things. I graduated as a education Spanish major, taught high school Spanish for 5 years, needed a second job when my second child was born, ended up selling furniture to a guy who was in the paper business, and next thing you know, I'm selling paper. And so I've come from teaching to sales to a great career in management and sales. And then when I thought that it was all over, my wife Barbara said, "Bob, I'm going to go into the dialysis business. I want you to design the dialysis centers and build them for me." So that's what I spent the last 12 years. So what I'm getting at, not to bore you, is that I was so well prepared by a Jesuit education to be able to do anything I wanted. And the more I met you guys, and the more I talked to people, the more I found that you're all like me. You know, you're all like me. And Barbara and I decided to give back. And we started a scholarship. And we got involved in the Estate Society. And they're not paying me to tell you this, but I did want you to know that we've made provisions in our will with our IRA and so on and so forth to be able to help the university. And I want my legacy to be able to move on and to live with us. And that's what this is all about. This is camaraderie. This is 50 years. We're here because we all went to school together, because we all had a great time. And I can't tell you how much I love the University of Scranton.
Joe Casey.
My reflections and remembrances of the university. The first sight. First time I ever saw the University of Scranton was in late August of 1965, when my parents dropped me off here for freshman orientation. There was none of this coddling of prospective college students by college road trips that occurred in the Casey family. I was the oldest of 8 kids, and the family plan was that we would all be going to college in the Philadelphia area to save cost. Fortunately, my father relented, and for any male offspring who expressed an interest in his alma mater, which was the University of Scranton. This could not have turned out better for me. My remembered events. We were here during turbulent times, as we know. Vietnam, the Civil Rights Movement, Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King's assassination, the Johnson, Nixon presidencies, student uprisings, etc., etc., etc. While we certainly did not go to the extremes that occurred on other campuses, we did have our share in the limelight. But we also had fun and lots of it. I remember homecoming weekends, ski weekends, singer concerts, and tours in New York City and other venues. Players' plays, club football, NCAA Division III basketball games, concerts by the Four Seasons, Dionne Warwick, Simon Garfunkel, Johnny Mathis, and more that I'm sure that I have forgotten. We seemed to be on the A-list performers circuit back then. Senior year, some of us sparked a campus-wide protest when a group of student leaders were caught by a security person in the Aquinas office watching the 1968 presidential returns in the presence of several forbidden six-packs of beer. A foreshadowing, perhaps, of the Watergate break-in several years later, which ultimately involved the guy who won the election that night. We were all 21, but this was nevertheless a violation of the university's rules. A student court trial ensued, a guilty verdict, and the campus quads lit up that night. Things settled down, a pardon was granted by the president of the university, and life went back to college normal. Remembered faculty. It is with great affection that I remember the outstanding professors I had and the privilege of knowing them here. None of us who had him will ever forget Professor Bernie D. Williams.
Amen.
He of the, quote, dish unbelievable conference, close quote, fame, which I believe can be correctly translated into one of those Hohenzollerns, just an amazing bunch of guys. I never was lucky enough to get assigned to one of Father Edward Gannon's philosophy classes, but I did receive the benefit of his astounding intellect via many informal chats in the dorms, cafeteria, and student center. No matter how low you might be feeling at the moment, Father Gannon always made you feel that you were glad to be you. Father Joseph Rock was another Jesuit I will always have the highest respect for. While he adhered to the more conservative branch of some of the Society of Jesus, which were not particularly popular with us rebels, he did live in the dorms with us and shared most of his meals with us, giving us the gift of his wisdom, grace, and kindness. Other faculty members that I remember with great fondness were Father McElhenney, Dr. Passon, Father J.J. Quinn, who incidentally brought the actress Glenda Jackson from London to teach on our campus acting, as he did for the great Irish actor Richard Harris, and the Jesuits. The University of Scranton has been for a long time, and hopefully always will be, a Jesuit university. The Society of Jesus took over control of a struggling Christian Brothers college in the early 1940s and turned it into the university that nurtured us and surrounds us to this day. The Jesuits formed and informed this university, and through the university, each of us, its alumni. We all are deeply in debt to the Society of Jesus in general, and to the Jesuit fathers with whom we were privileged to have come in contact. The Ignatian principle of curae personalis has defined this institution and Jesuit education, not only here, but worldwide. I'm deeply grateful to the university for all that it has given me over 50 years ago, and which remain with me to this day. Not the least of its gifts are the friendships formed then and which have endured and sustained me these 50 plus years. Many of these friends are here tonight, and I thank these men for their friendships that mean more to me than I can express. 50 years ago, we were a bunch of Don Quixotes tilting at perceived windmills, and I like to think, and I'm pretty sure, we still are. Thank you.
So Bill and Jack, would you like to come up together and share your remembrances?
Well, you heard me talk about my oldest recollection from that Sunday night in August, arriving here and to my surprise, having dinner with the president of the university. What I'd like to talk a little bit about is the legacy of the class of '69. And I think that's culminated in what happened in April of 1969. At your table, you should have some copies of some correspondence from that period. And a lot of people don't understand what was happening in that time period. A lot of people are confused, as Jack was observing earlier today. The issue that was before the Conference on Resident Student Affairs, it grew out of that incident in the fall of 1968 when students over 21 were found to be drinking beer on campus. I think we were a dry campus at the time.
I thought so.
And the president of the university said, well, I didn't realize there were these problems, these underlying concerns, and formed this Conference on Resident Student Affairs. And I had the privilege, I don't know who it was, but I'm going to blame him. Somebody came up to me in the cafeteria and said, you have to run to be the senior member of the Resident Student Affairs Conference, and foolishly I did and was elected to that post. And in the spring of '69, we were talking about parietals, women in the dorms. Now, we're not talking about putting a sock on the door handle.
No, the tie.
What we were talking about was we had these residence halls that the first floor, if you can imagine this room, empty, with a tile floor and basically nothing in them, going to waste, and we were looking for ways that we might find that you could have an area where guys and girls and couples and double dating groups could sit around and maybe have a pizza or play some board games or watch television or whatever, because there was no place to socialize on campus. And when we left for Easter break, while we were gone, the then president said, I've made up my mind, we're not going to change the policy. Well, when we came back, that didn't go very well. And as Jack observed to me earlier today, it wasn't about parietals. It was about collegiality. It was about the relationship between the student body and the Jesuit community. And that breakdown was what we were responding to. Some of you may recall that earlier we had to wear coats and ties to dinner. What happens when spring comes and you get out of class at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you're going to go play touch football for a few hours, and then you come back to go to dinner? So guys would show up in sneakers with no socks, cut off shorts, a sweaty t-shirt, tie wrapped around their neck, and a jacket. Well, we were discussing with the powers that be the notion of, look, tell those guys to go back and take a shower. Put on a polo shirt and a pair of pants and come back when you're dressed appropriately. And the striking thing about it was that one night there were a group of us who were conservative and not inclined to radical actions of any kind, tempered in our disposition, who I decided we were going to lead a protest at dinner. And when all the faculty was, all the members were in there, all in the class, 20 of us were going to get up and drop our trays. We were going to break every plate, every cup, every saucer, and we knew that the rest of the classmates would follow. That never happened. That night, a sign went up on the door to the cafeteria. No more coats and ties at dinner. Now, the troubling thing about that, and that's the old university, the troubling thing about that is it says to young men of 19, 20, 21 years of age, in a time of great turbulence, that you can't deal with the powers that be with authority without violence or threats of violence. That's the wrong message to be sending. And in the spring of '69, that upwelling of disconnect that we all had manifested itself in shutting down the university for a day. As you may recall, there was a comment made that those students who did not attend class on the day that we had said we were going to shut down the university, they would have some demerits or some kind of action taken against them right up until the university senate, the faculty senate, voted 25-1 to support the students. We broke the bond between the very rigid Jesuit community at the time and the faculty who joined with us in saying we need change. And out of that process, in the following year, the task force continued, the activities continued in the class of '70. A number of reforms were proposed and adopted by Father Galvin and the other leaders here. And I like to think that within 2 years, the fact that the university went co-ed was part of the transitions that our class was responsible for. And so I think we can properly remember that time as a time when, unlike at some universities where there was great violence and great turmoil, we were able to engage ultimately in a productive and constructive dialogue. And that dialogue is part of what I was referring to in my comments before the medal ceremony about a Jesuit university. So while I have mixed memories of times when the code of conduct was a bit harsh, I also have very fond memories of the ability of our class, the leaders, the troublemakers. You'll find in here Jack Gallagher, Larry Leiser, David Blake, me, Ed Benintende, John Ashcroft. We were 6 folks who led that effort. And those people today form of that task force. Half of them are members of the reunion committee, which I think is striking. So, Jack, you wanted to comment on some of that process as well, because you were at the forefront, and I'm going to publicly blame Jack for the one thing that was most successful about it. When we were trying to get the university's attention, I believe it was my lawyer friend here who figured out that the accrediting entities for universities all required that the university have an elected student government organization. And his idea, we got all of the elected officials to resign en masse, simultaneously. And suddenly the university had no elected student body. And as a consequence, that got their attention. The one thing that they were concerned about was they're going to lose their accreditation. They didn't deal with these issues, and they dealt with them in a constructive manner. I don't blame you for that. It was a great idea. It was a great idea. It was a great idea. Go ahead.
One of the nice things about being last is that there's not a lot to add. So there were a few details that I do remember, very few, certainly not as much as Bill remembers, from 1969. I do remember when the Faculty Senate supported us, and Father Osterly, one of the nicer, more liberal Jesuits, led the effort to support the students' effort, because the faculty had their own issues with the authoritarian, more rigid members of the Society of Jesus who wanted to keep things the old way. And that was really a big part and parcel of what we thought of at the time as our breakthrough. But I'd like to talk a little bit more about the bigger historical context of where we were here at Scranton and where our society was. When we started college in 1965, our government had just passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and Medicare, three of the biggest accomplishments of recent memory in terms of moving forward as a society and achieving social justice. The same political leaders and government system that produced those milestones, within 3 years, had us in the chaos and turmoil of the Vietnam War and all that happened. And I, for one, at the time I was here, was pretty oblivious to a lot of this. I just was not aware of the significance of what was going on around me. I was probably just self-absorbed with trying to make it day to day. But I became aware of all of these things later. In 1968, we had, of course, the Chicago Democratic Convention with police riots. We had the assassination of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. Then we had the election that led to Joe Casey's conviction for drinking. And at that time, I must say, Joe and the others who were drinking for good reason were thinking our country could never conceivably elect a president worse than Richard Nixon.
I vote for adjournment.
Whether it were so.
I agree.
So that was what was going on in the outside world, beyond Scranton, while we were here. And what we were talking, Bill, the events Bill was talking about happened in April of 1969. Also in April of 1969, I had committed to go to law school at Cornell. And on the front cover of Time magazine that very month, the black students at Cornell had taken over the Student Union building, and in support of their effort to get a Black Studies program launched. And they had weapons, lots of them apparently, and the cover picture on Time magazine 1 week in color had the students coming out after their victory with rifles raised in the air and bandoliers of bullets. And that was the front cover. My mother said, I was never leaving Scranton. So what we did here in our lives, in our little part of the universe, was a big victory, was progress for us. But the rest of the world was moving on, and that's part of the reason we were able to move on. We were talking, citing to the Jesuits examples that the other Jesuit college, particularly Georgetown, had begun to move on from some of these restrictive rules. If you remember, and how could we forget, we had a cut system. If you missed more than 3 classes, you failed the course. We wore coats and ties to class every day for 4 years. The dorm students wore coats and ties to dinner. The dorm students, when they were freshmen, had checks in their bedrooms at 7 and 11 every night. All of that is gone now. Of course, we were part of the transition from the in loco parentis school of monitoring to the much more liberal regime that prevails today. No school today could get away with it because the students wouldn't come. And of course, the marketplace has become competitive. Apart from all of that, I feel similar to Bob Bednar, that the University of Scranton made me what I am today. I had 12 years of Catholic education before I got here. The good nuns gave me a very good basic education, but they also gave me a lot of indoctrination. They helped us know what we were to think, not just how to think. And that began to change when I got to the university. And the Jesuits, who were the authoritarian types, didn't necessarily fully appreciate that they were undermining their own authority by teaching us how to think instead of just what to think. And that's what led to these events, both here and elsewhere. And so I learned a lot, I grew a lot, and I'm very grateful for the experience I had here. When I went to law school, I was very uncertain about whether I was adequately prepared. I had classmates who went to much better schools, at least by reputation, had much better pedigrees, at least by conventional standards. And yet, I was able to not just participate, but to prosper. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is I'd like to open the floor for other reflections and memories that people might have or that were triggered by these remarks. And I'd like to begin with Joe McDonald, who a pretty smart guy, at least that's what he's always told me. And Joe, would you like to share with us your fondest memory of the university and your time here?
I think I wrote in the little yearbook that it was the Richard Nixon election night that Joe has already described. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Can you stand here? Yeah, okay. So, and I want to re-emphasize Jack's presentation of the period in which we were in. He and I, you may know, remember, ran against each other for student body president. I won probably by a little notch. I served for a while during the beer party events, and I then left, I think, partly with the pressure on my mind of what we were facing in the world and of how O'Toole's would suddenly become Vietnam. And Jack took over, and the events of the spring were his and others' event. That what was a rivalry to begin was a collective act for change. And we both emphasized the need for this university, as always universities need this, to renew themselves, to ditch the past problems that beset them, and to offer new visions to their students as they entered of what was possible in the future. So that's my response.
Anyone else? There has to be other thoughts for you. Larry?
My voice isn't as strong as Joe's, and it never was. He won and Jack and I lost. You know? I wanted to say something about Reverend Edward Gannon. You remember he used to have those crazy races around the building to raise money, and you run around the building so many times and you raise dollars and things like that. So at our 10th reunion, I came back and I was walking into the now destroyed student center. And I was coming up with my wife at the time and about to enter the building. As chance would have it, he was exiting the building. And the door opened and he stuck out his hand and he said, "Lawrence." Are you doing well or are you doing good? Think about it. Are you doing well or are you doing good? Edward Gannon. That's what he was all about. And he taught us how to do good. And I'm just so pleased to reminisce with some of my classmates about all the good you guys have done. Oh my gosh, you know. This place made a difference. And I'll be ever grateful, like the rest of his family, being here. Thank you.
Is that all you have? Come on.
Hey, Dave. This is in reference to the shirt and tie situation. I attribute to the Jesuits. I was thinking out of the box. During that period of time, I had a shirt that I cut out. And I had a shirt with buttons on it and a tie attached. I kept it in the dormant hanger in 2 cuffs. I remember we were out playing something, football or something. They said, "Hank, you got to get back and get ready for dinner." I said, "I'm all ready." I just took everything off, put this, like the old tuxedos, and it cost, went to dinner. And I took that to the Jesuits, thinking out of the box. So I didn't really care about the shirt and tie. I was all set.
Is that the same shirt you have on today? Anyone else?
So I remember Father Galvin. He came from Baltimore, Maryland, where I'm from. And he was a vice president at Loyola College. Came up here, served for 4 years. And I remember he had a tough time, I think, as being president. I don't think he was well suited to be president. And then after he spent 4 years here at the University of Scranton, he went to Georgetown Prep and spent 40 years teaching math, taught algebra, did a great job, enjoyed his time there. Going forward, 40 years later, I have a friend in New Hampshire whose son was a student of Father Galvin's at Georgetown Prep. He said he was a great teacher. My son learned a lot from him. He enjoyed him a lot. So I think the 60s were very turbulent, very difficult, and it was hard to manage a situation like that. And thank God we all came through it, and we're doing well. So God bless us.
Anyone else? So I have a final thought that has been with me since thinking about this reunion. And it's a kind of simple thought, but it's been haunting me, and it's that with the 1969 version of David Blake, would that version of David Blake be proud of this version of David Blake? And would he thank me for the life he ended up living, and that ended up with me here now? So I leave that thought with you. You know, have you made yourself from 1969 proud in how you lived your lives? I'm sure you have. So the night's still young for some of us. For others, it's bedtime, but I think there's still festivities going on here, aren't there? There's still festivities going on, which means there's still a place you can get a drink. So thank you very much for this evening. So yes, thank you.
I wanted to follow up on one thing Bob Bednar said about the Estate Society. The gentlelady sitting next to me at my table is Carol McCulloch, who's with the Advancement Department, and she is in charge of estate planning, estate gifts, and things like that. So if any of you have questions or are thinking along those lines, seek out Carol at your convenience. She's been around with us all weekend, and I'm sure she'd be happy to chat with you about those kinds of things. That's it.
Thank you.
That was a paid commercial.